Blog Talk Radio.
Stone Guardian, Crystal Keeper, Gem Lovers of Rocktown, welcome to There's a Rock Around. Welcome everyone to There's a Rock for That. I am your host, Mary Brown, coming to you live from Amarillo, Texas. And this is going to be a fun, exciting show today. We've got all kinds of things in store for you. We have a wonderful guest. We're going to try a new divination technique, well, a very ancient divination technique with a really great, I don't even want to give it away yet. I'm not even going to tell you yet. Let me get some housekeeping out of the way. Of course, you know, I'm sure you are listening to the Psychic Talk Radio Network. We are also available on the Tarot Guild website, thetarotguild.com. And you can listen to the show and join us in the chat room there by going to thetarotguild.com/chat. And this show, as many of our shows are all sponsored by the Tarot Guild, the international organization for tarot lovers, students, and professional readers since 2004. Visit the Tarot Guild at www.thetarotguild.com. And if you haven't joined our Psychic Talk Radio Network Facebook group, you need to join it. I post a card every week in there, and there's all kinds of cool information. It's a terrific way to keep up with what's going on, what we have going on. We have a lot going on the Psychic Talk Radio Network. Great shows, great hosts, great guests, great topics. You don't want to miss that. Go to psychictalk.net/Facebook. We have a page and a group. Like the page, join the group, join the conversation. And the card I posted there today comes from the Great Eastern Oracle by the Great Rasuli. And the message is such a beautiful card featuring Rasuli's artwork. And the message is to cherish every moment. Let spirit carry you forward. And this is really a call for us to be more spontaneous and live to the fullest by making every moment count. So that's something to practice anytime, but why don't you try it today? Just for today, cherish every single moment of today, the good, the bad, the wonderful, the sad, whatever it is, and find something to cherish about it. And just let me know if you tried that little exercise and what the experience was like for you. I'd love to hear about it, because I think something interesting happens when we choose to do that, when we try to appreciate every moment, regardless of, whatever judgment we may have, or whether it's a good experience, a bad experience, whatever. There's always something in our experiences for us to learn from and to grow from. And our crystal of the month is Lapis Lazuli, an ancient stone, probably one of the oldest of the opaque gemstones from history. I mean, we're talking more than 6,500 years old. I think that's maybe the furthest back we have, dating of it, like from archaeological finds, that kind of thing. It's a deep blue stone that includes these tiny flecks of mica. And, sometimes it can look like there's a night full of stars there, and it's probably, the most well-known source of Lapis Lazuli comes from the mountains of Afghanistan, or what is now Afghanistan. And The stone's name comes from two different cultures, which I always found interesting. Lapis is a Latin word meaning stone, and lazuli comes from the Persian word lazhuard, meaning blue. And the interesting thing about it is, like, it's not an element, it's not a mineral, it is a rock containing multiple minerals. So you have lazurite in it, you have diopside in it, you have calcite, pyrite, even more. There's references to it. Biblical scholars believe that the references in the Old Testament to sapphire were actually talking about lapis lazuli because, you know, what we know to be sapphire today was not known in the Middle East before the Roman Empire. But there's so many wonderful things. It is really considered a very, it's so funny, a very spiritual stone. And not because, me or, some new age book about crystals tells you, this is a very stone or something. We're talking like going all the way back to the Sumerians, who believed that the spirits of their gods lived within the stone. And while ancient Egyptians saw it as a symbol of the night sky, so we're going way, way back into antiquity. How we look at it today is really interesting. There's some beliefs that it wards off evil. There's, some people that believe that it's very good for enhancing our psychic abilities, using it on the third eye chakra. Some people use it for healing, for headaches and anxiety and even skin disorders. So I wanted to share that with you. Explore Lapis Lazuli if you haven't yet. Either, get yourself a nice little piece of it. Like we say a lot on this, show, it doesn't have to be like the most expensive, most gigantic piece of stone. And if you already have some, pay a little more attention to it. Just for this month, okay? Just this month, and then see what comes of it. And again, let me know if you have an incredible experience with Lapis Lazuli. I would love to hear about it. Okay. Now, let's get, all right. Today's show, I'm so excited because I have someone who's been a guest on this show before, one of my favorite people, and that is Mr. James Ricklef. And let me tell you a little bit about him. He calls himself a fortune helper, not a fortune teller. And I love that because, and I'm going to ask him about that because I'm sure we want to know a little bit more about how he came up with that. And he's written some really wonderful books. He's created some really wonderful decks and written the books to go with them. You might be familiar with him from books like Tarot Reading Explained, which used to be called Tarot Tells the Tale, which seems like a classic because I hear so many, I can't tell you how many times over the years that book has been recommended to me, but it's now been re-released as Tarot Reading Explained. He had another book, Tarot Spreads Get the Whole Story. He did the Tarot of the Masters deck, which is gorgeous. I have that one, and I love it, and the book that goes with it. And he's amazing. He did RWS 2.0, Pithy Tarot, and Pithy Tarot app. You can find him on Facebook by just going to Facebook, James Ricklef Tarot and Pithy Tarot, and you can also follow him on Twitter. He is Ask Nighthawk on Twitter, and that's Night with a K, like, the dudes on the horse. Ask Nighthawk. Anyway, and we're going to be talking about my favorite book of his, the Soul's Journey book, and we're going to be doing Bibliomancy with it. And before I just go on and on and on, let's go ahead, James, on to talk about it, too. Hi, James. How are you? Welcome to There's a Lot for That.
Hey, Mary. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, yay! I'm so excited you're here. And it's such a treat. It's such a treat to get to talk to you a little bit before we get into the whole bibliomancy and all of that I'm so excited about. I know so many people are excited to learn about it. But it's such a treat for me to get to talk to you about the Soul's Journey book that you wrote. And just it's been, it's really one of my favorite books. It's just so lovely. And, you know, can you tell people a little bit about how did that even come about? Because it's a tarot book, but not entirely. Like, tarot is a thread in it. I feel like it's so much more. I don't know if that's a good way to describe it. How do you think of it?
Yeah. I think of it as a book about spirituality. It's talking about the soul's journey, meaning your spiritual journey. First, let me talk about why I wrote it. Originally, it was a series of blog posts. And I was writing those blog posts because I needed this information. I felt that I really needed something to help me on my spiritual journey. Okay? So how I wrote the blog posts was two different ways. I wanted to relate it to tarot cards. Being a tarot reader, you know, it kind of meshed it together. And I thought, okay, how do the individual cards relate to your spiritual journey? Okay? And I came up with two different ways of doing that, and ultimately, in a different sense, one way of doing it. Let me talk about the two different ways of doing it. One was I would just contemplate one of the cards and just see what came to me as far as what it said about our spiritual journey. The other way was, while I was doing this, I was reading a lot of, and still do, very spiritual kind of books. And so I would come to passages in them and I go, oh, wow, this really seems like the, you know, whatever card, you know, the Queen of Cups or the Ace of Wands or the Fool card or whatever, you know, I'd say this, and so then I would say, okay, I'm going to start from that passage and considering that card and just write something about that and post that, you know, for the card. And yeah, so that's, you know, the two-pronged approach for having material for the blog posts, which then, of course, I accumulated into, re-edited, and created the book. But the overarching way that I wrote it, I think you could say, is that to a large extent, I just sort of channeled it. Okay? You know, there's so much of it that as I was writing it, I'd write it and I'd go, whoa, where did that come from? You know? And this is the only one of my books that I continually reread. There's over 300 little essays, spiritual essays in it attached to, you know, the various cards. And I will read one per day. And when I'm done with that, I'll turn around and start over and just read one per day. So it's sort of like a day book. You know, and as I'm reading it, sometimes I read it and I go, whoa, where did that come from? Again, you know, did I say that? You know, did that? And so it really felt like and feels like that I channeled it. But again, you know, why I wrote it was I wrote it for me because I realized that I needed this. And then as I was doing that, I was thinking, wait a minute, I don't just need this. Everybody needs this. And that's why I then turned it into the book. So does that kind of make sense of where this book came from?
It really does. And that's so fascinating because it's like you you had a journey with it, you know. And also I wanted to ask you, like, those moments, you know, in the things where you're like, where did that come from? Is it the influence of reading, you know, spiritual things? Do you think that has an impact? Like, does it influence us? Like, did you feel as you're, you know, going through this whole thing, and even just starting with the blog post, it's like you find this thing and like, oh, okay, and then you make that sort of connection to one of the cards. Do you think it would have ever made it? Would you have been able to do that? Say you didn't read, you know, spiritual writing, you know, for your own reasons. And I mean, I don't think it's the kind of book that you could write any other way. I don't think you could just be like, I'm just going to write this great spiritual book, you know, without having the thing going on.
Yeah, there's two answers to that. One is, if I had never read any sort of spiritual books, I would not be the kind of person who would have even occurred to write this book. Okay. Second of all, though, all the things that I've read have kind of gone into my head, you know, and it's like there's this huge file cabinet in the back of my head, and so a lot of the stuff is coming from there, and it's like, you know, my higher self, however you want to put that, then would sift through that and say, oh, here's some information that you read, or is it that my higher self is just coming up with stuff that, you know, that is coming from the ultimate source, you know, if you want to call it God, or the, you know, the universe, or however you want to call it, you know. So it's hard to tell exactly where that's coming from, but I think that doing all the readings of various spiritual kind of books put me in a place that I was able to understand this. So that's fascinating, because I think that's it's like that elusive sort of thing, you know, and I think it happens with, you know, spiritual books of all different flavors, right? Where sometimes, you know, sometimes it's the way that they're written, you know, it's not so easy to, you know, interpret. Like, it's almost like sometimes writing can happen on different levels. And so I think, like, well, you know, sometimes, though, we may not feel like, okay, we really are getting this. I'm thinking of, like, Zen cones and things like that sometimes, where you're like, well, okay, I have to really keep thinking about it. But, then the influence somehow winds up being there. It's like we get it without knowing we get it. And I kind of, go ahead. That actually reminds me of something else. Is one of the things that I wanted to do with this book was make this sort of spiritual stuff, information, or however you want to put it, accessible, because there are a lot of books that are very deeply spiritual that, if you're not really far along on the journey, it doesn't make any sense, you know?
Exactly.
And so I wanted to make it at a level that it's accessible to people just starting out on this journey. And also, going back to another of your questions, when you're asking how I would phrase this book in terms of tarot, I think that it is primarily a book about spirituality, and tarot secondarily. That tarot is sort of just the coat rack on which I put the coat, you know. But I really wanted to explore spiritual messages of the cards, because I think that that's not been given nearly enough of its due in the tarot literature.
Yeah.
But I think
yeah.
First and foremost, though, I think that it's a spiritual book. I could go through it and take out all the references to tarot cards and still have a great spiritual book that's just plain, a spiritual book.
Yeah, I
it
think
has that added flavor of the tarot.
Well, and I think it's so helpful too, because I was thinking about that. And you're right, there isn't much. And it's strange too, but like in the tarot books that are out there and keep coming out down the pipeline, there isn't a lot of focus on spiritual meanings of the cards, and yet there's a lot of repetition of all the other stuff, and it's like, how many times does somebody have to write the same keywords down? Like really 5,000 books wasn't enough for the same thing, but it's like that. Plus also, here's what I see happening is that not all readers, right? Because we are a mini splintered group, just in general, people have all their different styles and stuff. But I have seen a lot of readers that are like, I want to give, more uplifting and more spiritual messages when I do my reading. And so what do? They don't look for spiritual meanings in the cards. They go get an angel card oracle or something else, that's like, okay, and here's how I throw in the spiritual flavor. Here's your card at the end of my reading. Ta-da, I put a spiritual button on it. And I think that, it would serve most readers, any reader that wants to have that kind of reading that they give, like that's the style that they're developing, is giving more of a spiritual message or reading. I think it would serve them well to get your book.
I think so too.
Yeah. So let's talk about not just, we gave it its due as a spiritual book, as a tarot book, but I have used it for bibliomancy. And you have too, right? And so we need to tell people who aren't familiar what exactly bibliomancy is. And, look, it's got to be, and I can't prove it, right? But I think as long as there was writing, I would guess that there was some form of bibliomancy happening. It's one of the oldest forms of divination, and, used in so many different ways, even in, many religions around the world. One thing that I found that I thought was really interesting was in Judaism, right? There's this thing called the Shulchan Aruch. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But in it they say it is not a sin to divine an answer using the Goral, which was the Goral at the time. It was the practice of opening up this book, the Shumash, to see an answer to a question. And another thing that they would do, and that was also a form of bibliomancy, was asking a child for the first piece of scripture that came to their mind. And I thought, well, that's a crazy way to do bibliomancy, It's like, you want an answer, you go up to a kid. But Christians have used the Bible for years. In the Middle Ages, they used Virgil's Aeneid, and that became kind of a common thing in Europe. In Iran, they used the Divan of Hafiz, their mystic poets. and other books as well, you know, and it's just like it goes on in so many different cultures. You know, what about you and your experience with bibliomancy? Because I've used your books for it, and I've used other books for it, but I don't know. Do you think tarot readers, is it a natural for us to do this? And what about you?
I think that as tarot readers, we are used to using something to get answers. Okay, if you're using the cards, it's called cartomancy. Okay, if you and so with that, you just randomly deal a card. Bibliomancy is very similar. You take a book instead of a deck of cards. You randomly open it up to a given passage, and you use that. So the actual process is very similar. It's just a little different because you're using a book instead of a card. In terms of the actual process, I know there are various different ways of doing that. The way that I do it is I just sort of open the book at random, kind of, riffle the pages or something, and till I get to a place, and then just kind of with my eyes closed, point, and there, that's the passage to use. I know that you said that there's something. There are other ways that you've heard of to be able to do that. But that's, randomly opening it up is the way I do it.
It's the easiest way. I think randomly opening it up and putting your finger on it, and there's other ways of doing it, like where you take dice, because there's some books that, and there's some today, not a lot. I bought one recent book that is just designed, for that, and I don't know. I don't know about that book. I'm going to have to buy a different book and see. It just didn't really resonate with me all that well. So I won't even mention the title. I can't remember the title, but it's just, if you have these books of bibliomancy that were designed with numbers that would, like, the pages would be numbered, but not necessarily in order. It wasn't like it started with page 1, but you could roll dice, to randomly get the page number to come up. And so all the pages would have numbers that would fit, like, any possible dice roll. So that's another way to do it too. But what I noticed though, looking at all those things, it's really and it's kind of like the way we shuffle and cut cards, right? It's that trying to create the random draw, and it's the same with the book. But and some people were very specific about you have to put the book on its spine, assuming it's a hardcover book, and let it just fall open, and just the first thing that your eye catches. But I kind of feel like there's no wrong way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, my problem with that one about putting it on the spine is that for me, if I put the book on the spine, it's probably just going to tip over instead of open up. You have to kind of help it a little bit to just open up instead of just tipping over. Yeah, but
I think they must have had really, really large books or something.
Yeah, and I think that as long as your intention is pure with doing this, that's what's more important. That you're opening yourself up to this, and I think that the universe can work with you. The universe does not require you to follow strict rules that somebody came up with. I think that the universe is a little bit better able to work with you on this. So.
Oh, I like that. That you said a lot with that right there. Oh my gosh. But yeah, and the thing that I think makes the Soul's Journey book so good for bibliomancy is that you don't land on something like, weird. I mean, there's, some of these books like the Aeneid, there's some weird stuff in there that, like, if you point to a certain passage, you're like, oh, this is where I'm shipwrecked. Uh-oh, or a dragon, I forget what all is in the Aeneid. I don't think there's a dragon. But the Bible has some crazy things.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff that you're talking about, you could just say, well, this is some weird stuff if I were to take it literally, but if I take it figuratively or, the symbol,
like a metaphor
there, then it might. The Bible is probably the most commonly used book for bibliomancy, but the problem there is there are some things like the begats part of it where, Joe begat John, begat, it's like, well, okay.
It's like, what do I do with that?
Applicable, yeah.
Yes, I got to do some begatting. But yeah, and what's funny is there was one point, where I had, I was on a road trip and I was reading your book. I had it with me, and big changes were going on in my life, and it was just a sense of like, I was thinking of like all the things that were different, all the things that would have to change, all the things I'd have to deal with. I'm like, how am I going to deal with it all? Because it was going from, kind of us like, having our life and everything to, moving to a different state to take care of people that were dying, family members. And I was sort of overwhelmed by the prospect, and I tried some bibliomancy with the Soul's Journey. And I just want to share this with you because it's funny because it's not one of the spiritual quotes, right? Instead, it was something that you wrote. And this was on the Seven of Wands, right? And you have a great quote on the Seven of Wands from Swami Prabhupada. I cannot say his name, his last name, but some Swami. Thank you. Thank you. We could be here all day trying to pronounce that. But what I landed on was this. So, I have all that stuff in my head, everything that's changing, everything that, new responsibilities, things I'm going to have to deal with and learn to do and try to do my best at. In the paragraph I landed on, you wrote, in the line above it says, it helps to keep in mind a few questions. This a real problem? Is it important? Is it something worth fighting about? Or am I just defending my pride? And it just stunned me. And I kept that. I kept that the first few months here. Like everything that came up, I'm like, is this a real problem? Am I just, it just was so helpful. Is this important? Is this worth fighting over? It just somehow, that really guided me. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. I'm always happy to hear that people have found things in my book that really helped them.
Yeah, and it's funny because it wasn't, it wasn't one of these great spiritual gurus. It was, well, maybe it is. It was you.
Thanks.
Guru James. What about you using the book for bibliomancy?
Well, recently, I've been having problems with one of my neighbors who's a very annoying troublemaker kind of person. And so I thought, okay, how can I deal with this difficult neighbor? He's a troublemaker and I keep getting triggered by him. He just likes to stir the pot and stuff, So
one of those.
So I opened the Soul's Journey, just randomly opened it, In case anybody has it there and they want to look at it, it's on page 177. It brought me to an essay for the 10 of Cups titled "Love Everyone Near and Far." Okay, and let me read what it says. It starts out with a quote that says, "Your home should be the center and not the boundary of your affection." So it says that the number 10 reduces numerologically to the number 1, which indicates self. So it may be seen as an indication of a higher level of self, such as community. Thus, since the suit of cups is associated with love and relationships, the 10 of Cups asks us to consider questions like, do I understand my relationship with my community? Do I realize that at a deep spiritual level, I am one with my community? Do I have unconditional love for the people around me, from my family to my local community to the world? That last question is an especially difficult one. Universal love is not an easy reality for most of us. For example, it can be hard to love an unappreciative boss or a disruptive neighbor. But even though your heart may not be there yet, just being mindful of the ideal of loving everyone in your life and of making that your goal can move you in the right direction. Yeah, so first of all, I noted that this essay actually mentions a disruptive neighbor.
Yeah.
That's such an incredible coincidence. But what I especially found interesting was that third question: do you have unconditional love for the people around? Do I have unconditional love for the people around me, from my family to my local community, such as my neighborhood, to the world?
Yeah.
And I decided to explore that one. Well, I certainly did not have unconditional love for this person. The advice that I saw here was to stop finding ways to be mad at him and aggravated by him, and just start finding ways to love him. And that's quite a search, but I figured, since he is flawed, I'm sure, like everybody, I'm sure that that is the result of injuries to his psyche, and I should have compassion about that. I mean, there's a Plato quote that I like: be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle that you know nothing about.
Wow.
Also, I realized sometimes it's best to love someone from afar. So, just because you're supposed to love someone does not mean that you have to hang out with them. So conversations with his neighbor have always been aggravating. So, I can love him from afar by just avoiding talking to him beyond a pleasant hello, just so that he doesn't, I don't let him trigger me. But the situation also reminded me of a story that I heard Marianne Williamson tell once. She said that, when like 30 years ago, when I was living in Hollywood, I would go to her talks because she was doing them very, in that area.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Anyway, she said that she had this bad relationship with somebody, just shorthanding this, and that what she decided to do was whenever she got aggravated and, it would keep coming up in her head, she would say, I release this relationship to the Holy Spirit, and just sort of use that as a mantra. And she said that after a little while, she just stopped being bothered by it and, had a very good experience with that. So that's another thing that I realized that I could do whenever, he did start coming up in my head as like, oh, he said this, and why did he say that? Just I release this relationship to the Holy Spirit. And it also suggested that I could include this person in a loving kindness meditation. Without going into much details, people can look up what a loving kindness meditation is, but it's basically that you start with yourself and you say, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, that kind of thing. And then you say the same things about somebody that you love, that you're very close to. May this person, my wife, my husband, my child, or whatever, be happy, be safe, be secure, and everything.
Oh.
And then you go to a difficult person. Okay, and you say, may this neighbor be happy, may this neighbor be safe, may this neighbor be, secure, and so on. And then you say it for the whole world, may everyone be happy, etc. So that's basically what it is. And so it suggested that I do a loving kindness meditation sometimes, which I do sometimes. I do meditation every day, and I just mix it up, and sometimes I do a loving kindness meditation and include this neighbor as the difficult person part of it.
Wow.
So those are things that came to me, and concrete things that just occurred to me that I could do in order to have unconditional love for this person who is around me. Is it easy? No, but it's a process, and that's okay. It's doing that sort of thing mitigates that sort of aggravation that we have. So that's all that came to me from reading that one passage about the Ten of Cups, loving everyone near and far. So that was one
wild
example that I have for doing this.
Yeah, that's just a beautiful way that you. Well, what I love about it is, it's the same thing happens with tarot too, right? Where, we get a card, but in this, you read a passage, but it's just like, it's not just reading it. It's like considering it. It's contemplating it, and then all these creative ideas of how to solve the problem, essentially, come to you. And so I love that, because it shows the practicality of doing divination. Like we are trying to solve problems, or we're trying to get more insight, or it does its things. And I think you put the word out, and I put the word out, and we got a few questions that people sent in for us to try on the show to get a reading on using your book. And I'm excited about this because I assume you're using the physical copy, and I'm using the copy on my Kindle just to show that, like, you can do it. It's like, it's really fun, actually, to do.
How do
I do it?
How do you do that with the Kindle? Because you can't just randomly open the Kindle.
Well, yeah, what's so great is this. So this is like a new technique. I don't know if anybody else is doing it. Maybe we're introducing something brand new here. But basically what I do is I pull the book up on my Kindle. And, when you click on the page, your whole screen is covered by the page. But if you look at the bottom, there's like a little scrolly thing. It's like a little line that has a dot on it, and you move the dot back and forth to get into different locations in a book. And so I just kind of like, and it goes really fast too. You can go from like 0 to 100% of the book just with a flick of your finger. And so I keep my finger on that while I focus on the question. And then when it just feels like the right time, I release it, and it lands on the page, and I just like press it. And wherever I pressed it, that paragraph.
Okay. Cool.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
So you got a question from somebody, right?
No, you did. You got a couple of them when we were talking. A couple of questions from people that we might use.
Oh, yeah.
And so I thought it'd be good to discuss one of them. And the question that you said that somebody put in was, what is the image of the Creator? And what they were talking about is, the Bible says we are made in the image of the Creator. And so I thought, little way to alter this somewhat is to say, put the question this way: if, as the Bible says, we are made, quote, in the image of the Creator, what does that mean?
Oh, I like that.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought we could do that. So do you want to do your thing with the Kindle, or would you like me to use the physical book to come up with something?
I don't know. Why don't you go ahead and do it with the Kindle, just because that's something, new and different and an innovative way of doing this, and of course, starting now, everyone's going to be doing this. They're going to say, I've heard this on Mary's podcast. So why don't you do that? We're going to make it popular.
Kindle for that. That's right. And you're thinking about the question, and what did you come up with?
Yeah, and I just landed on something crazy. This is wild. It says,
okay. When
we understand, I am on, let's see, what is this? This is, this is heavy duty. It's one of the things under the Devil card.
Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah. And the part that I landed on here says, this illusion of being separate from other people allows us to treat them in ways that are sinful. And the illusion that we are separate from the divine is the source of suffering that hell represents, an agonizing separation from divine grace. But when we understand that we are all connected, we see that whatever we do to others, we do to ourselves. And when we recognize our connection with the divine, we are delivered from suffering. That's wild that that comes up on this question.
Yeah.
And so if it means that, okay, so what does it mean that we are created in the image of the Creator? It means that we are not separate from the Creator.
Right. I mean, I don't think that when the Bible says we're made in the image of the Creator, that means that God looks like a person. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very limiting in terms of your understanding of God. I think that what it's saying then, what this is saying to me, is that knowing that we are in the image of the Creator means that we are part of, we are, essentially, are connected to the divine.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, I'm just so I'm like shocked. Like it came up on that question, and then that really answers it, in like a deep way. Because I think that just the question itself is coming from a point of separateness. Like I'm sure, the person that asked it was kind of like, okay, kind of thinking along, what you said, like, does it mean God looks like me or I look like God or what's going on here? But no, it's really about the connection. It connects us. I love that. That's wild. That's what I think. Wow.
Yeah.
Deep stuff here. So let's try another one. Like, wow.
Okay.
And you had a question.
Yeah. I had kind of prepared one that we could do on the show, and I did a little bit of it. The question is how to stay sane in a world that seems to be going insane. Yeah, I mean, you have so many crazy stuff,
Problems.
from things like Russia invading Ukraine and threatening nuclear escalation if in the Baltics, if Sweden and Finland join NATO and stuff like that, to
it's
things
crazy.
like how people have responded to the threat of COVID or global climate change. And so, these are big things, and people are there's just this insane kind of responses to it. So how to stay sane in a world that seems to be going insane. Okay. So I thought, okay, we can do this one on the show. And so I wrote it down on it. This is so funny. I wrote it down on a piece of paper and then just kind of randomly opened the book and put it in just so that I'd have it in the book. And then I realized I just did bibliomancy. I just randomly opened the book.
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
another method. You created another method.
Just randomly, accidentally doing it. Not accidentally, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so where I put it was on page 112. That's in the section for the Ace of Wands, and the place that it came into was, because I put it there and then I did, my close your eyes and put your finger down.
Yeah.
And I can read this to you. It's a section called A Higher Purpose.
Yeah.
Many people erroneously think that being on a spiritual path means retreating from our responsibilities in life, but that is far from the truth. Our higher self, our connection to the divine oneness of the universe, urges us to strive to be the best person we can be in the here and now, and to do what's right with confidence, determination, and vitality. All of this is a reminder that our actions, which are, of course, performed here on the earthly plane, can have a higher purpose when we allow divine inspiration into our lives. Okay, so, first let's start with that, and what do you think? What do you think of that?
I think that, it just seems like right. It's like when you think of the question, it's like, I think that it's really, all the insanity, that we see going on. Yeah, if we don't have a sense of a higher purpose, it's almost like you get, like you get pulled down into like the swirling, going down the toilet, kind of feeling, like, it's like, it's almost like that's our life raft, in a sense, to have a higher purpose.
Yeah, what it calls to mind for me, because it talks about strive to be the best person you can be and do what's right. It called to mind the quote that has been attributed to, whether it actually was or not, Gandhi: "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Yeah.
And so it has that sort of advice and how to stay sane in the world that seems to be going insane. You just be the change that you want to see in the world. You be the sanity that you want to see in it. But then it also talks about allowing our actions to be guided by divine inspiration. And so when I initially read that, I thought, okay, but where we, how do we get that sort of divine inspiration? So I thought, okay, I will do another bit of bibliomancy for some clarification on that. So I, again, just randomly opened the book. And in case people want to follow along, I'm on page 171. It's regarding the Eight of Cups, and it's the section called Leave Behind Emotional Distress, which I thought was kind of pertinent to trying to stay sane. I'm going to read
yeah.
a couple of excerpts from that.
Yeah.
First, in her book, Who Would You Be Without Your Story, Byron Katie asks someone who is going through a difficult and painful experience this question: if that were your only way to God, would you take it? As Katie points out, one way to consider a difficult situation is to realize that everything can be a path to the divine, and all problems may be considered grist for the mill. This is a sentiment we also see in the following quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Quote, "There are no mistakes, no coincidences. All events are blessings given to us to learn from." End quote. Our problems can put us into a state of mind where we have no alternative but to surrender. Thus, they may move us to live in the present moment in a state of acceptance instead of living in anger about the past or anxiety about the future. I thought that was very relevant too. But our problems can move us in this way only if we let them, only if we choose to trust the divine and see the path we're on as our path to God. So
wow.
I thought that was very helpful. Just, realize that, yeah, things seem crazy, but dealing with this, if this were your path to God, would you take it? And of course, So to find out what you can learn about it, be open to what you can learn about it. Also, the fact that this section is called Leave Behind Emotional Distress. It's a way to stay sane is, not be distressed by that, but just realize that, hey, this is the path that I need to take. But the other really fascinating thing then is after I had read that, once you have this sort of thing in your psyche, in your mind, or in your heart, you start to see more about it in other places. And so just shortly after I had done that, or read that about, leaving behind emotional distress, I was reading, because I do a little bit of reading every day, also from a book and from other books, and the one I'm reading right now is The Shadow Effect. It has sections by Deepak Chopra, Debbie Ford, and Marianne Williamson. And the part that I read that next day is a section by Marianne Williamson. And in case anybody has that book and want to see, it's on page 151. And I read something that I thought was really relevant, and I can read that to you.
Yeah.
When we're lost in the darkness, our greatest power lies in calling on the Holy Spirit, whose task is to separate truth from illusion. We do this through prayer and through willingness. Quote, "I'm willing to see this differently," is a sentence that gives the Holy Spirit permission to enter into our thought systems and lead us from insanity back to truth. So again, that word insanity is coming up. But
Whoa.
also,
yeah.
But it also gives you, gives all of us something concrete to use, and that is when you're dealing with this stuff and you're reading the news or watching the news and you're going, oh, this is just insane. Just say, I'm willing to see this differently. I'm willing to see this differently. And repeat that. And just, And
oh, that's huge.
And that can happen. Yeah. So those
and we should all try this. We should all try that, because, it's a kind of question, I feel like, that question, how do you stay sane in an insane world, is kind of applicable to like all of us. Like we may, see all the things going on, through our own, maybe different perspectives or different perceptions of it, but it's still the weight of it. It's still the craziness of it. It's still all these heavy things happening. And if we can just, remember that, be willing to see it differently. And, man, because it is that sense of like, you really can drive yourself crazy, like taking in everything that's happening and not releasing from it or seeing it in a different light. So, oh my gosh, we have been talking for an hour. It's like it's already the end of the show. It's like I want to keep doing this.
It flies by.
It does. Yeah. Oh my gosh, James, this was so much fun. So much fun. And
it was.
And you got to come back for another Bibliomancy episode or something else wild, that new forms of divination that we're just creating on the fly here. The Kindle method, the flip of paper method. I love it. Love it, love it. And thanks so much for coming on. It's so much fun to talk to you. And I know you've got so many exciting things that you're making, like the rest of your Tarot de Marseille deck that I can't wait for, and you have to come back for that too. Okay.
Well, I hope so. I've done the major arcana. I'm getting a little bogged down on doing the minor arcana. Just it's that kind of deck. It's not as exciting as like the Rider-Waite-Smith to work on. When you don't have pictorial pips, it's like now draw one sword. Now draw two swords. Now draw three swords. It's like
add another sword. You're almost there. You're almost done with the sword. One more sword. Well, maybe you should do some bibliomancy on how do you make it exciting.
Okay. So,
you never know.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. This is great. I hope that this inspires people to try this on their own.
Get the Soul's and get the Soul's Journey book. You have to get the Soul's Journey book, and we'll have links on the show page to all of that, and in our replay posts and stuff. Definitely they can find you on Twitter just by looking for @AskNightHawk, and your blog page.
Yes.
Your blog page. Look up
James
Ricklef's blog.
JamesRicklef.wordpress.com. James Ricklef, all one word, .wordpress.com. That you have that link on your site, right?
Yes, we do. Yes, we
and
do.
From there, people can find, click on products, and they can find my books, and go from there.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm just looking at the chat room real quick. Pamela Steele's in there. Hey, Pamela. It's Sharona and Dax. And Pamela says, I have the Soul's Journey on Kindle since it's released. It's wonderful. Thank you, James.
And now she knows how to use it for bibliomancy on her Kindle.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I love you, and I love everybody listening today and listening later in archive. Thanks so much, James. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Oh, I almost forgot. I got to tell you what's coming up on the Psychic Talk Radio Network this week. We've got some great shows. Our next show is actually going to be tomorrow, Mother's Day, May 8th, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. It's the Magic Universe Show with your host, Sharona Rapsick. She's going to be talking about auras and doing open lines all show long and free mini readings And then after that, our next show's on Monday, May 9th, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. It's the Wisdom of the Soul show with your host, Janice Fuchs. And that will be followed at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, with Spiritual Guidance Radio with angelic channel and healer Catherine Hahn giving free on-air guidance. And then I'll be back next Saturday, May 14th, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, for the Tarot Today radio show with my co-host Dax Carlisle, and we have a very special guest on, Raven Digitalis, who's the creator of the Empath Oracle. Plus, we will be taking your calls for free tarot mini readings. So that's it in a nutshell. What's coming up on the Psychic Talk Radio Network? You can find all of that information very easily by going to psychictalk.net/upcoming. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. And those of you that listen later or listen again, thank you, too. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.